I've just come out of the theater from Reminders of Him, the newest Colleen Hoover adaptation, and we need to have a conversation, mostly because I don't have anywhere else to put my feelings. I tried to write a Substack post about this movie, and I just couldn't get through it. So we're just going to have a stream of consciousness chat about how I found this movie, where I think these adaptations are leading us, and the unfortunate state of the Colleen Hoover cinematic universe. We need a touch of historical context here. Reminders of Him is the third cinematic adaptation of one of Colleen Hoover's works. There was a mini-series, don't remember what that was called, and there is a fourth movie coming out this year. Yes, two movies, two Colleen Hoover adaptations are being released in the calendar year of our Lord 2026. Absolutely insane. There will be more Colleen Hoover movies released this year than Marvel movies. If you had asked someone 5 years ago if that would have happened, they would have slapped you on the face. But that is true. That is the truth of the cinematic landscape of which we find ourselves. The first film, I don't remember what that movie is called, but it's got Blake Lively in it. Would you be surprised to know that that movie made $350 million worldwide? That film starred Blake Lively, normal person who nothing crazy has ever happened to, and who is not currently in the center of a controversy, so I don't know why that would be such a big deal. Regardless, that was the first, and that opened the floodgates to the dollar signs were spinning in these money-hungry studio heads, and they said, you know what? There's some money in them there hills, and those hills are mostly women from the ages of 18 to 34. Not my demographics, those are the demographics that are marketed in the Wikipedia articles and put out in the Deadline and Variety articles that I have read. That is the core audience. So clearly I am not that, but regardless, that is what the studio heads thought that they could do. Much like Marvel was aiming to tap into a market of 18 to 35-year-old young men, the Colleen Hoover adaptation cinematic universe is going after women from the ages of 18 to 34. That was the start. After the Blake Lively-led film Regretting You did so well, we had last year's effort, which was, let me check my notes here, It Ends With Us. Now, this was not as much of a box office sensation. I think it cleared 100 million worldwide, which is still a great work in today's box office. But what is so fascinating and interesting about this was this film was released in the doldrums of what was a terrible box office month and season last year, October, November. The box office was getting absolutely crushed. Nobody was going to the movies. Movies like The Smashing Machine, movies like Die My Love, absolutely getting tanked at the box office. So for that movie to rise above was another indicator to the studio heads and the decision makers that these movies can push through the noise and can still turn a little bit of a profit. Because I imagine that, we don't know for sure, but I imagine the budgets for these films are anywhere between 15 to 25 million. Maybe the one with Blake Lively pushed up a little bit more because she has more of a name, more star power. But these last two are really going off of up-and-comers or actors that are a little bit past their prime. So I don't imagine they're getting a ton of fees. They are incredibly cheap to make. No huge set pieces, no crazy CGI, basically people talking in rooms. So this seems like a 3 to 4x on their investment. So after those two, you knew we were getting more, and that leads us to me sitting in the theater taking in Reminders of Him. So let's talk about the film itself. Reminders of Him is directed by Vanessa Caswell, who kind of rose to fame with a television adaptation of Little Women. I believe that was one of Maya Hawke's first roles, if I'm remembering that correctly. It feels like Little Women is an opportunity for any up-and-coming female director to show their stuff, much like a Jane Austen adaptation, to kind of plant your flag and say, hey, I know what I'm doing. Give me a chance at something more original or newer. But unfortunately, it seems like Vanessa Caswell has kind of adopted a model of just making trite romance pictures. She followed that up with a theatrical release of a film called Love at First Sight. I must confess that I have never seen that picture. And then after that, now we have Reminders of Him. Before we get into the discussion of the film, we're gonna spoil it. I don't know if you can even spoil something like this, but if you would like to go in fresh and go see this film, go do that and then come back and watch this video. But I'm gonna get a little bit in depth with the plot details here. This film stars Micah Monroe, kind of a mini scream queen who has done very well for herself off of the success of Longlegs, and Tyreek Withers, who honestly acquits himself quite well in this film after I believe he was in a horror football movie named Him last year. Not incredibly successful, but again, he pops off the screen. He does have a little bit of a screen presence, even in that film. And I thought, especially in this movie, he's kind of magnetic. I understand the Idris Elba meme. I understand the charm or the effect that I have on women. I think he definitely understands it, and he is using it to great effect in this film. This film focuses on Micah Monroe's character, whose name is, let me look at my notes, Kenna. Awesome. Kenna is returning to a small town in Wyoming after a tragedy saw her imprisoned and her boyfriend dead. You know, something that you have to understand, and something that I am trying to wrap my mind around, is these Colleen Hoover adaptations, and I'm imagining the Colleen Hoover books, are basically like Mad Libs for trauma and traumatic experiences. She's basically putting terrible situations in a fishbowl, mixing it up, and pulling them out. There seems to be no real desire to kind of tell a fleshed out, real human story outside of just placing caricatures into an environment fraught with traumatic experience and just kind of letting them live their life the way that Colleen Hoover would assume that that's what would happen. So that you know, you have to understand that when you're going into one of these movies, which I did not know until I went and did some research, that's kind of what you're in for. You are going to have domestic abuse. I don't believe I can say the other word on YouTube. Another type of abuse. You're going to have death of spouses, death of children possibly. Basically, you're going to be manipulated into feeling something based on real life human tragedy. I do not have a problem with films that touch on real human issues and problems and traumatic experiences that they deal with. The issue that I find with these films, and this film in particular, is that there is no real mirror of humanity in any way, shape, or form. Let's take the Manchester by the Sea example. Another film that I would describe as trauma porn. However, there is more of a semblance of real human emotion and response, real human dialogue. Now, all of these things these are films, so they are heightened. They are creating an environment of heightened reality. I understand that. But you have to kind of hide the ball a little bit. You cannot let the puppet strings show when you're making a film like this. You cannot let trauma for trauma's sake be the reason that you're making these films. And I fear, with the Hoover books and also with the adaptations, that we are leaning more towards, well, these situations are inherently terrible, so we don't have to tell that good or that believable of a story. People will still attach themselves to these characters based on the difficulty that they are in or placed in by the author or by the director. So she is back in Wyoming. She is trying to put her life back together in the town in which she grew up, I'm assuming, where she met her deceased boyfriend, and you know, going around trying to find a job, trying to find an apartment, basically living in squalor, trying to understand, you know, why won't anyone help me out? And we're leaning very heavily on my first kind of issue here is the fact that she cannot get a job because she continues to put, have you ever been convicted of a crime? You know, that question on a resume, and checking yes and immediately being rejected. Now, I know that it is incredibly difficult to find a job when you have to check that box on a resume. I worked with someone who had just come out of a situation very similar to that, just probation, not actually incarcerated, but it was still incredibly difficult for this person to find a job. They had finally found a job working in the gym that I was working in. And, you know, I got to discussing a little bit with them. I would assume that in a small town in Wyoming, now these are just my assumptions, but I would assume that someone, I'm just going to go out and say it, someone white may not have the same level of difficulty. Now, you could push back on me and say that, yes, it's difficult regardless, whoever, but this is an attractive young white woman who is turned away because oftentimes people think that she is going to be violent with the customers for no reason whatsoever. That doesn't entirely track with me. The film does not do enough work to set up the fact that these business owners would see this woman and think, this is a violent criminal, I cannot have her working here. Maybe inherently in the book, it's in there a little bit better, but at this point, we do not know what her crime is, but we're not assuming that she murdered her boyfriend. She was only in prison for 7 years. She wasn't in prison for 20. So the film does not do enough work for us to get on board with her struggle to find a job. All I'm thinking is, clearly somebody would give this girl a chance. Again, could be a personal issue. She winds up at a bookstore that has been converted to a bar, going into this place thinking because this was a favorite haunt of her and her boyfriend, she wanted to get a little bit of comfort, go to the bookstore. Don't understand why the bookstore would be open at 9 p.m., and she would not understand that it has been converted to a bar. But again, the script is not airtight here. I could nitpick this bad boy for days. We're just going to kind of hit the big beats here. Goes in, meets a handsome young man, our friend Tyreek Withers, who's playing a man called Ledger. The naming conventions in this film are unbelievable, but again, we could nitpick this to death. Ledger now owns the bar. Turns out that he is the best friend of the former boyfriend slash fiance, but he has never met her. So he starts hitting on her. Cool. All that jazz is great. They strike up a conversation. Seems like some romantic sparks are flying. And then she finds out his name and understands, oh my God, this is my best friend or my boyfriend's best friend. I got to get out of here. All good. All done here. Oh, I forgot to mention that the main reason why she is back in Wyoming is because she was pregnant in prison, gave birth to a daughter, and the parents of the boyfriend who has been killed in this terrible accident now have custody of the daughter and refuse to allow her to see the daughter. Here's the thing I will say about this. Never one time in this film was I ever not on the side of the guardians, of the grandparents. Of course, if you assumed that your son was killed in a drunk driving or a DUI situation, you would do everything you could to protect that child from who you believe to be the killer, the manslaughterer of your son. So once again, the film does not do a good enough job of getting us on the side of our protagonist to understand why it's so difficult for her to see this child. Every time there was a moment in the film where she was taken away from the opportunity to see her daughter, I was like, that makes a lot of sense to me in the real world. So when we're talking about heightened reality, which this is clearly heightened reality, the filmmaker has to be competent enough, or the script has to be solid enough to give us an understanding of why these people are wrong to keep the daughter away from the mother. And the film never does that. They always feel justified in their actions. I'm always like, yeah, don't let this person see the daughter. For all intents and purposes, she is, someone who has been convicted of manslaughter by DUI. It makes sense that you would not want to bring this chaotic element into a young 5-year-old child's life. I don't know. And the film never does enough work to get us on board with the fact that she should regain custody or even be able to see her daughter. Now, as the film progresses and our Tyreek Withers character decides that he is going to take a chance on this woman, mostly because he wants to sleep with her. Again, that is how the character seems to be playing it. Not out of a sense of any pity or a sense of trying to understand what it was his best friend saw in this woman. It always reads like he's just attracted to her, and that is why he's willing to give her a chance, which just feels wrong. Again, if this was written a little bit tighter, or if the performance was a little bit stronger, there is a world where Tyreek Withers' character is intrigued by trying to get to know his best friend's former fiance. And that is why he continues to put himself in a position to speak with this person, to build a relationship with this person. But unfortunately, this film never offers us that perspective. It always seems like, whether it is a fault of the performance or a fault of the writing, I am more inclined to lean to a fault of the writing here, because I do think Tyreek Withers does a pretty decent job with what he's given. I don't know. I haven't read the script or the book, so I don't know if this is how this character is characterized in either of those pieces of media. The film only ever offers us a chance to attach ourselves to this Tyreek Withers character through his romantic leanings towards the Micah Monroe character. It always seems like he is trying to initiate a sexual romantic relationship with his best friend's former fiance, who has been to prison for killing his best friend, accidentally, of course, manslaughter, but it still stretches the bounds of credulity, of any type of understanding. These are not human emotions. These are not human choices that are being made. And again, back to the hyper-stylized, hyper-reality of these books and these worlds, that's fine. That's all well and good if you can convince the audience that this is how this person in a hyper-stylized, hyper-realistic world would act. and the film never does that. Tyreek Withers and Michael Monroe's character, obviously they get together, they have a sexual relationship, there's a slight bit of guilt, but not enough, in my opinion, about what they're doing, their newfound relationship. They fall in love incredibly quickly. These movies are paced as if they've got 10,000 pages to shove into a 2-hour film. It is breakneck speed at moments, and then it is incredibly slow at other moments. It is poorly paced. It feels like emotional whiplash. Regardless, they get together. The father of the deceased best friend walks in on them after Michael Monroe has finally told Tyreek Withers' character what actually happened on the night of the accident, that it was truly an accident. She popped a tire, flipped the car over, assumed that he was dead because his arm had been crushed and there was no pulse, ran to go get help, had a concussion herself, passed out at home, and was blamed for DUI, manslaughter, and fleeing the scene of an accident. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense, seeing as she only got 7 years. Also, I'm not a lawyer. I did work in a law office and I studied law. There's no world in which this person is being no chance that she's going to jail for 7 years. Not a chance on my life, brother. This feels it's what I said at the beginning. It is setting up these traumatic experiences without any tethering to a real world consequence of what would actually have happened here. A public defender worth their salt would not allow this to happen. This would, at best, be a probationary sentence, maybe a 12-month suspended sentence. Unless you got Adnan Syed's lawyer, and then you're going to jail for life. But the whole thing feels like excuse making to get to the emotional core of the film that either Colleen Hoover wanted to write or the director wanted to push us to. Nothing ever hangs together, clings together to create an emotional, actual narrative that even in the slightest mirrors real world consequences. So obviously the father of the young man who was killed is upset with this person. There is a brief interlude where Michael Monroe's character decides she's just going to leave. It would be better for her not to be involved in her daughter's life. I kind of agree. And Tyreek Withers' character comes back and says, you know what? I understand you wanting to leave. That's all cool. He steals one of her diaries in which she had been writing letters about her life, basically what had happened after the accident, which, okay, cool. Kind of a gambit, but go for it, brother. And takes that diary with the letter that describes what actually happened on that night to the parents. The mother reads it, and all is forgiven. Not entirely. I'm being a little bit trite, but it does feel like we've just completely flipped so incredibly quickly. There's not enough time towards the back end of this film for that moment to play out between the parents and the daughter, and the potential daughter-in-law, to where we can even feel a little bit of understanding to why these parents have kind of come around to the idea of letting this girl see her child, their grandchild. It just does not play at all. Things wrap up the way that you would assume that they wrap up. She's allowed to see her daughter. Her and Tyreek Withers are together. Hunky-dory, copacetic in about 15 minutes. Cool, that's the end of the film. The big reason that I continue to harp on even having a little bit of a connection to real-world consequences or to real-world human emotions is that you cannot fast-track these emotional responses. The music is swelling, she meets her daughter, and the audience is dead. At least that's my perspective. That's how I felt going in. And, I saw this film with a decently packed house. It seemed kind of dead, audience response-wise. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a mind reader. Other people could have been moved by this. But you need something. When we are taking in art, a human response to art is usually, not always, but usually, that response is elicited by a reflection of some type of humanity. Some type of understanding of consequence, real-world human consequence, real-world emotion, understanding of real-world human behavior. There's none of that in this movie. So when we get to these high emotional moments and we're just pumping in Coldplay or whatever top 40 radio song that was playing, and we're lighting it with, really saturated and hazy and beautiful, these are cheap tricks to try and invoke the emotional response that the film and the script were not strong enough to actually evoke. If you could not tell, already by that diatribe. I did not enjoy this film even one bit. I gave this film 1 out of 5 on Letterboxd. I thought that the Tyreek Withers performance was good, decent. Lauren Graham and Bradley Whitford did well with what they were given. The child actor performance was quite good. I found Micah Monroe to be confounding. She does a lot better towards the back half of this film, kind of when she finds her emotional footing. But the beginning of this film seems like she is drugged. She does not speak coherently throughout the first hour of this movie at all. She interacts with human beings as if she were an alien from another planet. I do not know if that's a directing issue or if that was a choice that she made in the performance, but she did not work for me at all. The fracturing of the narrative to do flashbacks and flash forwards didn't work at all either. This was shot incredibly blandly. Not really much to recommend here. I will say Tyreek Withers does a decent performance, and I'm interested to see if he can kind of break out of this teen heartthrob, Scream King kind of mode and work with someone who maybe will give him a script that's a little bit better than something like this. We're getting another one of these, man. I mean, Verity, like I said, Verity's coming out in October, so we'll see. We're probably getting 10 more of these Colleen Hoover adaptations because it seems like they print money. We'll see how this one does. I think the buzz is a little bit lower for this one. They may have saturated the market just a little bit. Based on my screening, it was about a half full theater on a Thursday, which was the premiere day. Word of mouth doesn't seem too great. The Letterboxd reviews don't seem too great, but you never know. I mean, Letterboxd is just... that's online, baby. There's a whole real world out there. So we'll see what the box office numbers for this are. For me personally, it's cool that people are employed and they get to work and they get to make movies. I would like them to make better movies, but it is cool that, you know, we're still doing the whole thing. We're still making movies and stuff. I didn't enjoy my time with this one at all, but such is my curse to see as many movies released in a calendar year as possible. So, did you enjoy this film? What did you think of my criticism? Was I too harsh? Did I miss some things, some important details throughout the plot? Let me know down in the comments below. I appreciate you checking this video out. We do contemporary cinema here. We do physical media, so make sure you're subscribed so you can get on board with where we're going. The Oscars are coming up. I will have an Oscars recap video for you fine folks on sometime next week. I don't want to put a date on it. But thank you so much for watching. Hope you are watching something better than Reminders of Him, and I will see you in the next video.